guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reacting to a video that looks very interesting. It's called How Norway Got So Insanely Rich. So I know that obviously Norway, it's one of those Scandinavian countries, and there are, I think, well, not, I was going to say like among like the richest countries in the world. But I don't think that's the case, but I believe in Europe, like in mainland Europe, like, you know, it is one of the most like richer countries, and not just like the people. I'm talking about like the actual country itself. So yes, I'm wondering how that came to be, because what I know is that it's very cool. So I don't really know what they do over there. So let's check it out and comment, like, and subscribe.
In the late 18th century, one of the great historical economists, Thomas Malthus, toured the picturesque but climactically harsh Danish-controlled Norway. The tiny population that resided lived a meager existence, subsisting off of their small farms and whatever they could catch in the sea. The winters shrouded the country in near darkness for half the year, and the amount of land suitable for agriculture was minute at best. Efficient travel in this mountainous country was almost impossible. Towns were remote and isolated, and its citizens were poorly educated, if at all. Long gone was the age of Viking conquests, bringing their riches and plunders back with them. Norway was not rich, but in fact, very poor. In the decades after the visit, things got even worse. Plagued with wars, blockades, and embargoes, Norway's economy was in ruins, and famine spread across the land. Norway, in a lot of ways, was destined to remain underdeveloped and unimportant.
Okay, that's harsh. I love that it was like so bleak.
If you don't include micronations, Norway is the second richest country on Earth, one of the happiest, the seventh healthiest, and it's ranked the most democratic nation. In almost every metric that measures the prosperity of a nation, Norway is near the top, and all of its citizens are technically quarter millionaires. But how? Many countries have tried to do what Norway has done, and ended up even more impoverished than before.
What did they do?
How did Norway become so insanely rich while other nations failed? And is Norway's economy just too good to be true?
Well, it isn't, because like it's for real for them.
These are the countries with the world's largest reserves of oil. Collectively, they account for 84.9% of the remaining supply, yet they only make up 7.9% of the world's GDP. Venezuela has almost a fifth of the total, yet it's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. In fact, most countries on this list have severe economic or social issues. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and the UAE all suffer from human rights abuses and extreme inequality. Russia has been in decline for decades, and Libya has been in a state of anarchy since Gaddafi was overthrown in 2011. This is what many economists call the oil curse. Today, oil and gas accounts for 27% of all energy generation, even as the world inevitably tries to move toward better and cleaner sources of energy. Oil today, and for a long time, will be a necessity. With oil nearing its highest price ever, you would think that having a large quantity of it would be a blessing for a nation's economy. The problem with oil is that it's like winning the lottery. All of a sudden, sometimes overnight, nations start to get inundated with mountains of money. They use it to lower taxes and dramatically increase spending.
And they don't know what to do with it.
As the oil industry starts to snowball into the most powerful sector of the economy, it starts to box out and overshadow all other industries. As more oil is exported, the demand for the local currency increases, boosting citizens' buying power abroad, but also crippling domestic manufacturing. New politicians promise to spend more to get elected, and dictators do the same to remain in power, choosing to spend today instead of saving for tomorrow. Often, the government becomes corrupt. The wealth is funneled to a select few, and before you know it, the economy is rich on paper, yet the average citizen suffers. But there seems to be a single extraordinary exception to the oil curse. As you might have guessed,
what did they do different?
Is Norway. But why didn't oil destroy Norway's economy? What makes it fundamentally different from Libya, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and all the other small oil exporting nations?
They're like the only one that managed to like escape.
About 100 years after Malthus's visit, Norway had just gained its independence when it separated from Sweden.
Denmark?
It was still uneducated and still poor. Its economy was centered around shipping raw resources like timber, fish, and minerals. and it had little in common with its rapidly industrializing southern neighbors. But it did have some things going for it. Over the prior half century, in the age of free international trade, Norway built the world's fourth largest merchant fleet, gaining them valuable expertise in shipping, trade, and technology, and being an important source of foreign currency. Norway had also coalesced a strong parliamentary system during its struggles for independence, and with it arose universal suffrage, workers' rights, and strong social reforms. Its wide distribution of political power and checks and balances served as a strong backbone to future prosperity. Their geography, while harsh, also enabled immense amounts of cheap hydroelectricity, laying the seeds for industrialization. However, almost 75% of all hydropower was owned by foreign companies. The new government saw this as a risk and believed the resources of Norway should be owned by and for Norwegians. A bill was passed limiting such foreign ownership and putting constraints on any attempts at monopolization. This experience in controlling natural resources would prove incredibly important later in the story. But all of this coincided with the introduction of new technologies, which significantly reduced the burden of transportation. Railways, roads, and new methods of transmitting communication greatly narrowed Norway's inherent disadvantage against its European neighbors. All of these forces kickstarted rapid economic growth and industrialization, but one way in which Norway differed was its very strong ties to welfare, education, and public industry that would serve them well later on. Norway would largely keep on growing, but being small and reliant on international trade meant it was swept up in the...
Yeah, something that they haven't actually touched upon is, I think Norway, like, I don't know how big is it, like, geographically, compared to like other countries, but I think not a lot of people live there, or at least that's what I think. Like maybe it's a small country. I think maybe around like 8 million people. I think around, let's say 10, but I think it's like a really small country. Maybe I'm wrong, but I hope they maybe like touch up on this. But I'm like, you know what? I think that also like makes I think it makes a difference. The fact that it's like actually a pretty small country. I don't know again if you're geographically, but like not a lot of people live there.
Global economic and geopolitical forces of the early 20th century. It was officially neutral in both world wars, but its merchant fleet took a massive hit in the first, and on April 9th, 1940, it was invaded and then occupied for 5 years
Not a good year for a lot of people.
By the end, like many other nations, Norway was left to pick up the pieces of its country and economy. It joined many international organizations and was one of the largest recipients per capita under the United States' Marshall Plan. The Labour Party seized the blank slate and worked to establish strict social democratic rule with a large emphasis on the public sector and centralized planning, while also allowing the inherent economic benefits of private competition to thrive. From 1945 to 1975, Norway produced an incredibly reliant and strong 3.3 GDP growth per year. Taxes were some of the highest in the world, but government spending on education shaped the workforce into one of the most capable on earth. It had a strong social safety net, and inequality continued to fall lower than comparable countries. Inflation remained subdued, and unemployment was almost non-existent. Norway's economic performance during this time was strong and steady, but it was a far cry from being the economic powerhouse it is today.
But they were like doing good. It wasn't like, oh,
by the 1960s, Norway was no longer poor.
Yeah, they did
largely
pretty well
caught
for
up
themselves.
with the other European nations, but it was still just an average performer. That was about to change. With the discovery of large reserves of natural gas found in the Netherlands, speculation started to arise about oil being located in the North Sea. But there was a problem. If there was vast amounts of oil beneath the waves, whose was it? After some back and forth, Norway asserted its claims over these waters. The Norwegian government was skeptical about the idea of oil residing on the continental shelf, but it nevertheless started to divide up and sell licenses for oil exploration. One such company, Phillips.
I actually have no idea how this works, but can you do that? Like, what happens if you don't really find oil, and if you sold the license, do those people still have to pay you? Like, that's how it works. You have to be pretty sure then. Like, I'm gonna buy a license to explore here, because I'm like, 99% sure that there's gonna be oil here. Otherwise, I'm gonna lose all my money. You know, speaking as like a company, not obviously like one person, but I didn't know that's how it worked because I thought it was the country itself. Like they said like, hey, there's oil. Like who wants it or something of the sort. I have no idea.
Petroleum started drilling. Well after well, try after try, they continued to find nothing. Due to some technicalities in the contract, Phillips gave it one last shot, but this time deeper. At last, in 1969, the first drops of North Sea oil was extracted, and not just a little, but massive quantities of it. A black gold rush quickly ensued, and in less than a decade, Norway was producing more oil per resident than any other country on the planet.
Because I think they have fewer people.
Became a titan. Thousands of high-paying jobs opened, sleepy fishing towns became petroleum powerhouses, billions of dollars started rolling in, and Norway's economy was forever transformed. But we have heard about this before.
Yeah.
The beginning of Norway's oil story had many similarities with other oil-rich nations. While foreign companies rushed into Venezuela, profiting handsomely and returning little more than propping up its dictatorship, Norway tried another way. Unlike in Venezuela, where absolute power was already in the hands of a single man, Norway's political power was already widely distributed, making it impossible for a single person or group to benefit themselves at the expense of society. Therefore, Norway's government was not only able to, but restricted in making decisions based on the utility to the whole nation. Norway had also watched the oil curse happen across the world. It knew that oil luck did not mean permanent luck. Much like its battles with the hydro companies immediately after independence, Norway took the same approach with oil. To the government, the natural resources of Norway belonged not to foreign oil companies, but to the people of Norway. These companies could help explore, drill, and extract the oil, but a majority of profits earned was to be funneled to the state. At the same time, its own public oil company, Statoil, was to study, replicate, and eventually surpass their expertise. Norway also knew that to squeeze everything out of this opportunity, it needed to not only extract crude oil, but to create its own petroleum processing industry.
Yeah, because
that meant massive investment in infrastructure, careful central planning, and the generation of its own engineering workforce. It could have easily slashed taxes and blew its lottery on popular policies, but it didn't. It also worried about the petroleum sector dominating the rest of the economy, so it set a 90 million ton per year limit. Oil was not to replace the Norwegian economic engine.
What does that mean?
It was to become its supercharger. But things were not perfect. Norway knew it wanted to spend the money to benefit its people, but it was not entirely sure how best to do this. The oil industry expanded, and so did prices. More money came in than the government knew what to do with it. Then, in the early 80s, oil prices plummeted, and a recession began. Economic growth stagnated for almost a decade, a time-old tale about economies based on oil. Norway was not squandering its oil revenue, but it needed to do something more.
They need to look for solutions.
When your economy is at the mercy of a single commodity price, the solution is to diversify investment. This is exactly what Norway did when it created its government pension fund in 1990.
Well, that's quite
Other governments tried this, but their political climates enabled them to become personal piggy banks to whomever was in charge, voiding them of their initial intended purpose, to save for when oil no longer showers the economy in money. Norway's sovereign wealth fund was different, and the government structured it in such a way as to not become corrupted. The government can only spend the profit it expects to generate. That means that new politicians cannot run on the promise of spending more today at the expense of tomorrow. And it also follows strict investing rules. It cannot invest in oil companies, nor companies that follow unethical practices. And maybe most importantly, it cannot invest in Norwegian companies. This might seem strange at first, but the purpose of the fund is to diversify risk.
Of course, you can do that if you put all your eggs in one basket.
A steep recession, the fund wouldn't, because it's not invested in Norwegian companies, and therefore it provides a safety net to short-term domestic shocks. Today, the fund has become the largest such in the world, owning 1.5% of all public companies in the world. At its peak, it was valued at $1.35 trillion, enough for every Norwegian to be handed $250,000. And this amount is expected to keep on growing, while other Scandinavian countries have had to reduce their social spending spending, Norway is using the interest of its oil revenue to provide healthcare, education, and a
Everything
safety
to
net
live
to
well.
families hit by hard times. Norway still has some of the highest taxes in the world, but its people never have to worry about paying medical bills that they can't
Or
afford.
anything, really.
Norway has managed to get lucky, but it maneuvered carefully and set itself up for the foreseeable future. Oil
They're the
is a
exception,
massive
not the
part
rule.
of the Norwegian economy. It provides high-paying jobs, but it still maintains many other productive industries. If
What else do
oil
they
went
do?
away tomorrow, Norway would hurt, but it would still manage to be one of the
Rich.
wealthiest nations on Earth. Does this mean it has the perfect economy, or one that other nations should seek to replicate?
I
the
vote yes.
answer is no.
Oh, well, I
Norway
would say
has been
yes.
given an incredibly fortunate situation. Not every country has trillions of dollars of oil sitting off its coasts,
Well,
but
yes,
its reliance
that
on the
too.
public sector has reduced competition and potentially growth, and its cost of living is among the highest in the world. Norway's economy
Did you
is not
reward it,
perfect for the
like,
world.
good?
It's perfect for Norway.
For Norway.
But what
Well,
about
that-
all the
you make a
other
good point.
oil-rich nations? Unfortunately, it appears strong democracy needs to have already been established
key.
before being blessed with oil. Otherwise,
Yeah.
politicians and strongmen jockey for power, seeking short-term gains at the expense
Yeah.
of the future.
And that's
Not
how you
only
get
that,
a disaster.
but established productive industries must already be in place, along with strong educational institutions to fully utilize the oil revenue's potential. For a more in-depth look at how oil can destroy nations, check out my video on how Venezuela went from being the fourth richest nation on Earth to one of the poorest. Norway, in a lot of ways, got lucky, but luck alone can often be fatal for a nation. While most nations squander their oil lottery, dumping money into social spending for votes, buying luxury villas, or sprawling desert highways, and stuffing the pockets of politicians, Norway invested its money and now lives off
This
the
is
interest.
stunning.
Economics is the study of scarcity. Everything is scarce, particularly luck. Nations that know this tend to thrive.
Wow. Okay. Really, really strong words. Yes. Yeah, those, like, I love that ending. It was very powerful. But yes, I agree with like everything that he explained it. I think he explained it very well. One thing that I'm a little bit like, again, I want to know how many people are actually like Norwegians are, no, not in the world, but how many Norwegians actually are. Because, the amount of like each, like the pension fund is like 250, something like that. It's okay, but how many people are there? Because, again, to put an example, like a huge country, I don't know, Russia or, I don't know, India, like some of those other countries, well, they just like, we have way too many people here. Like, if we have to divide like the amount of money like we have, you could say like it's $1 trillion, a billion. I can't even remember the amount. I can't even know that number. But it's like, it's a lot of money, more money than I can actually imagine. But whatever. It's like, yes, let's divide it into like how many people there actually, how many people there are in this country. And it's like, well, yes, but that's going to be like a huge amount. But if you have, if your population, it's, north of 60 million people, everyone's going to get, they're not going to get 250. They're going to get maybe, I don't know, 100 or 80,000, which again, it's not bad. Like, I'm not saying, oh no, like they're poor. Like a lot of countries are so lucky that they, people are super lucky that they even get that amount. But again, I think it works for them. And that brings me to, like, he makes, like, really good points. Like, he explained it all, what Norway did. And, incredible. Yes, great. I agree. Incredible work on the part of, like, Norway and, the government. I don't know if they work with, like, is it democracy? Well, obviously it's a democracy. But it's like they have a president, a prime minister. I don't really know the situation, the political sort of, like, system in Norway. However, it is that they did it. Obviously, it worked for them. But it's, like, again, it's a combination of factors that worked in Norway. So at the end, at the end of the day, it's like they said, like the video said, it's like, well, it worked. These are like really good pieces of advice that I think are really sound. But at the end of the day, it worked because Norway like has a specific like particulars that actually made this work. I do agree that there's like, for the macro part of it all, not just, again, it's like it's a smaller country. And, there was like a combination of factors that really did make it so. That really did make, oil actually flourish there and people can actually enjoy the, like the actual, the luck that they had of like, hey, yeah, we found oil here and we, as in like the people are going to actually like, get the rewards of this. So and on one hand, yes, good, but on the other, it's like yes, but you guys had like a particular set of situations that made it that way. Specifically, like he said, I think they sort of like they discovered oil sort of like quite old, quite I know quite new. Well, it depends on when the timeline is. But if you're looking at it from like today, as in like the present, it's quite recent. I think it's the 1960s with, and that's I think that's what, 60 years. And that's super recent, actually. Like in the timeline of the world and in the timeline of a country, that's nothing. That's like a blink of an eye away. So I think the fact that they sort of like discovered oil like so close to what we are today, I think it was a huge difference. I think probably the biggest difference, although he said like, well, it's probably the fact that they also had like a democracy, like a really good democracy established before they discovered oil, which I think obviously it's a huge part of this. It's like, yes, absolutely, and I agree. But I think that goes along with the fact that they discovered oil in the 1960s, which was, a lot of countries, not to say I think most countries, had already been like, they have been existing, they had already been like existing as nations for at least 150 years or even 200 years. So I think obviously that makes like a really, it's like, well, what are you going to do? They found oil and great for them. And they said it was a stroke of luck. But other countries, I think they were a little bit unlucky in that sense of like, on one hand, oh, so lucky, we found oil, perfect. But it's like, well, again, you're not actually thinking about it. It's like when you have, like a monkey's paw, like it's a wish and you get your wish. And yes, great. But you're not actually seeing like the full picture of what your actual wish is going to become. And that's probably why they say like, be careful what you wish for, because it's like on one hand, yes, great, I got my oil, now I'm rich. It's like, oh no, that's where the problem starts. So it is like, yes, I absolutely agree. But I think again, Norway was like a particular set of situations that made it like why Norway is like that because of oil. And again, it's like, because also I think a good thing, for them, it's not just the fact that, it was obviously oil being discovered like quite late in the game is actually a huge part of it, but that makes it so that they had to actually figure out like ways to actually live, survive, and thrive without oil, which I think is usually like the case with a lot of like these countries that, they are overly reliant on oil. And it's like, yes, they put all their, again, like they said, like, you put like all your eggs on one basket, like it's a recipe for disaster, because if you don't really know, what else, you don't have like a backup plan, and that's the only thing that you have going on. Well, what happens if that's the only thing that you have? Disaster occurs. Like they said, like in the 80s, there was like the oil crisis, the prices were lower and everything, and all the economies like went into recession. So it is like, yes, if that's the only thing that like, oh yeah, I only know oil. It's like, well, yes, so what are you going to do now? It's similar to, maybe not that similar, but a little similar to, someone, it's not, again, maybe it's not a good comparison, because it's like with people are not countries, but it's like, yeah, like I think like you get laid off from your work, and maybe it's the only thing that you know how to do, because it's like, oh, I only know how to do like this a specific thing. And on one hand, great, incredible, especially like in really high, like technical jobs that require like a specific set of skills. On one hand, good, because like, oh yes, people, I'm going to earn a lot of money because I'm the only one that knows how to do this a specific thing. But if you get laid off, or if something comes along in your industry and, you're like, there's no place for you anymore, and that's the only thing that you know how to do, then you're basically, oh, well, what am I going to do now? It's a huge disaster. So it's sort of like similar in the sense of like, you always have to, always going to need a backup plan, and that's true for like people and also countries. Again, the scale is not the same, and maybe like the cases and the comparisons are not completely apt, but sort of like, I think they're similar, in the sense of you always need to do something else, and you always need to figure it out what else to do with like, if this fails, if something happens, even the unthinkable happens, you need to know what are we going to do. Especially I think when you're, well, obviously if it's your life, you're just going to be like, no, my life imploded. But especially I think the governments and, the presidents or whoever is like ruling a country, should definitely, it's it's the the burden is a little bit bigger because obviously you're in charge of the lives of like millions of people. So of course you need, and I know I'm not saying it's just like one person, like the president. No, it should be like the government, which it's technically like a parliament or whatever. It's like a bunch of people, but they should definitely, they should think of this. It's like the lives of millions of people are in your hands. So maybe you should like think more about this. Which sadly, I think it's the case for like a lot of these other countries that don't really think about like their the people that live there. I think something that's also very important is that in Europe, I think the culture is like pretty different from all the other countries that I mentioned, because in Europe there's, I think, and I don't know, maybe I'm totally like off about this, but I think that most people in Europe, they have a sense of like community, and not in the sense of like, oh, we're all family, we all love each other. No, but I think there's a sense of like, because of Europe, I think because of like the history of Europe, there's like a sense of, even when you when you're like, I don't know, oh, I hate this country, not in that sense, but in the sense of like the community of like, what am I doing? It's gonna hurt someone else, or more about like, again, if we do things because it's good for the culture, it's good for our society. And I think a lot of other countries in other continents do not really have that. I think that's very particular to Europe. Maybe I'm totally off about this, but I think that's a little bit of my perspective. I think Europe does have that. Most countries are like that. It's a sort of a commonality in Europe that they do things for the well of the society. Like if it's good for the society, most people are going to agree. And a lot of countries are just a little bit more individualistic. And again, it's like not everyone, but I think in general, for the most part, I think there's a sense of like, again, building a sense of like a society and a well-functioning society that not other countries have. Because even if they do sort of like want it, in theory, obviously everyone wants, a society that works properly. When it comes to like actually, taking, either taking, I'm gonna have to like, some things that I may want to do and they're going to be cut off, or everything's I'm going to have to compromise. But I think a lot of people are, again, in Europe, they're maybe a little bit more willing to do that, and in other places they're just not. And I think that's why you get like, I don't know, dictators and white people like maybe care less about those things, because it's like, well, maybe they're more easily led as well, because maybe if no one really invested in education, then that's how you get like bad people in the government. Although again, not always, but I think usually that's the case, and that's why probably you should invest in like in having like a really strong sense of culture, or a good sense of like history, and a good sense of like, hey, if you choose bad people, in for your government, like bad things happen. So I think that's a problem that a lot of countries have in a lot of different continents, especially in the American continent, or probably like Asian countries, African countries. So I think that's how you get like dictators and bad people in upper echelons of the government. That it's a whole thing, and that's, I think, that's a whole other discussion. But I do think that for the most part, it's like, yes, I think they got the hang of it. They got the hang of it, and I do like that what they said of like because again they could see, and it was luck, and it was like they were lucky enough to actually know that while this is lucky, and the fact that we have oil here is insanely like a stroke of luck, like this is incredible. Because we know what can happen like to other countries, is like we're going to do things different, and we're not going to be led on by the situation. It's like, yes, it's like someone that maybe earns, that, oh, I won the lottery, I'm rich, and then just like squander it all away, or people that suddenly start like earning a lot of money, and they just like don't invest in their future, and they just like squander it, and then like 5 years later they don't really have a lot of money, they don't have anything, they're bankrupt, and they're like, wow, how are you able to, blow through all that money? Didn't you make like any, a safety net for your future? And I think also, like, again, it's not just people. I think normal people, a lot of like celebrities also fall into that. It's like, yes, they think it's gonna last forever. Basically, it's like, yes, this is gonna last forever, and it's like, no, nothing actually lasts forever. So you really do have to like either make the most of it, what you have, while you can. And obviously when you're in the period of like, oh, I'm earning a lot, I'm doing good, invest in your future on a plan B, invest in something else, but do not just go and say, oh yes, like I'm gonna be rich forever. It's like, no, absolutely not. And I think that applies for, again, people, countries, and basically any other like situation in life. I think that definitely can be applied, and that's why these are very good pieces of advice. Even though they're like, yes, I know it's like oil in Norway, but I think you can also apply it to your life, because there's like a lot of these sort of like commonalities that are actually quite true also for people and human lives in general. And again, if you see how it turned out for some of them, and oh, how unfortunate, maybe if it happens to you in the future, you can look back and say, oh well, I don't want to fall into that because I know it's bad. So maybe what can I do different? And maybe you'll make better choices. And I think that was what went wrong with probably other countries. Is like they had the benefit of being like, you know what, we're gonna do things different, because again, we're a different culture, and we're different people at the end of the day, and we're a different kind of like, we have a different kind of mindset here. But yes, this was incredibly interesting, and I really loved this discussion. And that was it for today, and I'll see you soon. Bye!